Hi, this is Chris Hoy. Thank you for joining me on Create with Chris. Today I will be sharing how to create this whimsical snowman door hanger with simple strokes and magical tips. Even though the painting may look complicated, it is a quick and easy project that anyone can create. Everything I use is listed in the links below, including surface, pattern, and supplies. So whether you are a beginner or painting for fun, join me for this fun afternoon project. The door hanger is a 12-inch MDF set and it has 9 separate pieces. I did seal it with multi-purpose sealer. Now I am loading my 3/4 inch oval round with winter blue and just slip slapping it over the background randomly. There's light and dark areas. I want to have a lot of movement. Picking up a little bit of slate gray on the dirty brush to slip slap and blend together. It's going to look light and dark, very wintry and very snowy effect. Make sure that the brush strokes are blended. Use a lot of water, and that makes it so easy just to meld those colors together and get that beautiful light and dark, soft blended effect. Plenty of water. I did allow it to be a little bit brighter around where the snowman head is positioned. I didn't do the bottom left corner. That's where his head will be placed. It just makes a good place to hang on. Loaded my 1/2 inch awesome angle with black plum. Just going to shade around the outer edge. It more or less frames it in, gives a little more depth to it. Using a stencil snowflake or a snowflake stencil and trying to decide placement. And once I decide where it's going to be placed, anchor it down really well with a piece of painter's tape. Loading my number 6 spectacular stencil brush with Snow White. Load the brush well and then wipe it over a paper towel. Just allows that heavy paint to be removed, and using a soft circular motion, pretty much just dry brushing that over the stencil to create that snowflake background. Allow this to be quiet, and it doesn't have to be solid and heavy white. Just like that look of soft snowflakes in the background. Reload often as needed. Keep a light touch. When your hand starts to get heavy with pressure is when the paint gets shoved underneath the stencil and you lose those crisp edges. Make sure every time you reload to wipe the brush over the paper towel. Take off that heavy excess paint. Another reason that the snowflakes may not have a crisp, sharp edge. Just going to reposition the stencil to fill in the background. A big part of this is going to be behind the snowman head, but I'm not really sure where that's going to be, so I just want to make sure that I don't miss any big areas and have a big void in the background. Just continuing to put the snowflake design on. I only used one coverage. I didn't want this too intense and bright, so just wanted to make sure that it was bright enough. Now this is an interesting technique and it looks so complicated. Just sliding the flat of my palette knife over a very thin puddle of Snow White on my palette. This just takes patience. There's no talent to it. If you get too much on the bottom of the palette knife, it's just going to be a thick blob or smudge. Very light pressure, smooth it out on the palette just to remove that excess paint, and then gently glide it over the surface until you get the desired effect. I am splattering it with some snow, but I know at the end I'm going to be adding more, so this is just the first go around, not only with the snow splatters, but also with the palette knife technique. And that's what I believe makes it so very impressive. Cover it well, but remember there will be more added towards the end. I'm using that splatter brush. I really love that. On the snowman face, I'm using my oval wash, and I'm doing that same slip slap technique. I'm just using the flat of the brush. It's not the chisel edge. I use a fair amount of water. I want my snowman to look fluffy, so I don't have to paint it solid, heavy white. The way to achieve that fluffy look is to slip slap it on. You'll see light and dark, but it's not going to be blotchy. Allow that to dry and repeat until you attain that desired intensity. You can see it's not solid, but I do have light and dark. Picking up some winter blue, I want to add a little bit of shading and color. My light source is on the right, so the shaded areas are going to be mostly on the left and around the bottom. Very, very light slip slap of winter blue. It's not going to take much. Make sure to use a lot of water to move that paint around. And I decided my face needed to be a little brighter after I added the blue. Always time to go back and add another layer. And you can see how I'm still slip slapping that, but blending it softly. Water is your friend on this project. It's just a very good way to feather those colors together and make it look fluffy and soft and adds a lot of dimension. I'm using my number 5 radical round for the eyes, and this is a brush that I had custom made. It has a nice point on it, so you can get nice sharp edges, but it has a thick full belly on it, holds a lot of paint. It allows for a lot of stroke time before you have to reload. And to me, that saves a lot of time. It creates a smoother coverage, and it's just a great brush to work with. Did the same thing for the coals on the mouth. I wasn't real particular. The snowman has etching where his eyes and mouth are placed, but I decided I wanted these coals to not be perfectly round, so I'm not being fussy about getting the edging. And you'll see as we shade and highlight how that all works together. So I just want to have a fairly round shape, but I'm not being real fussy on having it perfect. I don't think coal looks perfect. So I debated on whether to accentuate the unevenness, so I just thought I would try this and see how it worked out. Loading the toe of my 1/2 inch awesome angle with winter blue, just doing a shade around the bottom and up the sides, just adds a little bit of dimension and again more of that fluffy snow look. Adding some winter blue under the eye and up this side. Be careful adding it under the eye. If it gets too heavy under the eye, he looks really tired. So I'm just adding enough to make it look like his little eyes are snuggled down in the snow. Now I'm using my 1/4 inch awesome angle and thinned black plum. And I do want this to be a little bit uneven. It's not a smooth float, but I want to continue that look of fluffy snow. And I'm just adding loose shading underneath each one of the pieces of coal for his mouth. And then I'll do the same thing for the eye area. And just being real careful underneath not to get it too dark. And if it is a little dark, just clean your brush and move that paint around. Water, lots of water. I use a tremendous amount of water. On the eye, I have a little bit of winter blue on the toe of my 1/4 inch awesome angle, floating around the bottom and up the right side. I'm going to do the same thing on the coals, but I wanted to maintain that look of unevenness, so I'm using what I call a kind of a chop float. It's not super even, it's just a little bit of a tap and pull, and it makes it look like that surface is not smooth and perfect, just a little bit rough and bumpy. Now that that has dried, I'll go back and repeat with Snow White. And that's going to brighten them up and put a little bit of a glassy effect on each one of those. Using my awesome angle, and one of the things that makes my angle so awesome is it has extended length on it, which allows for a lot longer stroke before you have to reload. Now I need to add that awesome little sparkle in the eye using the end of my stylus, and I did a dot and kind of a drag tap. And sometimes when the highlights aren't just real perfect, they sparkle just a little bit more. Wanted to add some sparkle on the coals in the mouth as well. And I wasn't real sure how to do this to make it look uneven. So I started out just a little bit on the conservative side, and then I went back and kind of used my stylus to smudge it just a little bit so it wasn't a perfect float. I love having separate pieces to paint. This is the nose. I am base coating it with persimmon. I always start in the middle and pull towards the outer edges. That's going to prevent the paint from running down the side edges. Gives you just a really nice, clean application of paint. Loaded the toe of my 1/2 inch angle with tangerine, and I'm just kind of tapping across the top and pulling it down to create that look of ridges. Super simple. Doing the same thing with black plum on the bottom just to deepen that and pull it up and attain that look of shading and dragging it up into those ridges. Super quick, super easy, and it looks amazing. Forgot to do the little eyebrows. We have to add those in. My Epic script liner and soft black. Just paint 3 little eyelashes in the eyebrows. I added a little bit of a shadow underneath the eyebrows as well. Loaded my number 6 Spectacular stencil brush with watermelon slice, and I want this to be a real soft, dry brush. To make sure that both of the cheeks look the same, I build them up together. So I don't do one and then do the other. I work both of them at the same time. Just have a super, super light touch on it, and that way it's not going to be real heavy and solid. Make sure to wipe that brush off well on a paper towel before beginning, because it will get dark really, really fast. The scarf is foliage green. I use my awesome angle to base coat. I like having that point on the toe of it. Just really makes it easy to get down those sharp edges into any little tight areas. Just kind of turn it sideways and just pull it in there. Get that nice and covered. Now on this, I did speed the film up a little bit to take out the dry time, so keep that in mind. Also, I put 2 coats on most everything just to give a nice coverage. Shaded the bottom edge of that with plantation pine, adding some celery shoot along the top edge to brighten that up. And I'm just using, it's not a smooth float. I want this to look a little bit knitted, and we'll address that later, but kind of chop it in there. It gives it a little more texture. The hat is black, but I'm starting with slate gray. Remember, the light source is on the right side, so I am going to make it light to dark. Use a lot of water to move that paint around, and pretty much put slate gray from the right to the left, becoming lighter at the left side. When I pick up the soft black and slap that into the slate gray, work quickly. The paint is still not dry so I can move it around and blend it in very, very easily. The bottom of the brim is going to be the darker area, so I'll let the top edge be my light area on the brim. And because it's still wet, it's so easy to blend it together. Now I did let it dry, and now I'm putting on the second coat, that same slip slap. And if you think it's too light, then more soft black can be added to tone it down. So it's not like you can get too much on or too heavy and it's not going to work. Just make sure that light to dark is blended well. And I think I did go back at least 3 times to ensure that his little hat was dark enough. The first 2 coats pretty much put a smooth coverage on, and then I can go back with the soft black and deepen that down. Just one more time just to bring that darkness in and make it look like it's not a gray hat. And it still has a brushstroke texture to it, which works really well with this design. A little bit of paint makes such a big difference. That's my motto. Light coverage, so much easier to control, and you don't have to worry about those hard, dark coverages. The holly leaves are base coated with foliage green. Again, start in the middle and work toward the outer edges to prevent that paint from running down the outside edges. Get a nice smooth coverage. For the sake of time, I did paint it 2 times and I took that part out. The berries are melon, and I have a nice coverage on those. Just make sure it's nice and smooth. Picking up a little bit of plantation pine on my 1/2 inch awesome angle, and I'm shading the bottom side and the base of each one of the leaves. Again, I have a lot of water on my brush. It's just really easy to move that paint around to blend those together. Not too worried about the base, what it looks like, because those berries will be on there, but make sure that that is shaded just in case one of those little areas is not completely covered by the berries. Top coating the berries with watermelon slice. Because I put that melon base coat underneath, it just really makes that red resonate and glow. Putting some highlights on the holly leaves. I want to go down the center as well as the top side. Look how quickly that just really comes to life. Having these separate pieces is just so much fun. And you don't have to worry about tracing and base coating. It's just right there. On these berries, I'm using deep burgundy. I want to make sure where the right side up is. And you can decide which berries are in front of what berries. I decided I wanted that bottom berry to be in front of the others. So I'm shading around the bottom and the right side or left side with deep burgundy. Just a real nice float on that. A little bit of melon to highlight the top and the right side. Bump down to my 1/4 inch angle just because I have better control. And I'm not so worried about shading or floating that in perfectly. I kind of like that look of, it just looks a little artsy when it's not perfect. Black plum is my shading color, and I'm adding that right in around the left side and across the bottom. And that works on there, works really well. Put it in position, and then I want to put a little bit of black plum around the berries, so I'm letting the berries be in place so I know where they're going to be positioned. And once I get that basic outline, I'll lift the berries up and just deepen that black plum shading. Just want it to be smooth and dark and not messy. Bring that out into that plantation pine shading just a little bit. Double check and make sure it looks good. I use so much water I can go back and clean it up. It's not a problem. A little bit of Snow White and my Epic script liner. Bring that shine on those berries. Didn't want it to be super perfect, so I let it wiggle just a little bit. Wanted to make the sweater or the scarf look a little bit knitted, so I have my sweater knit stencil, and I'm going to use Snow White and my Spectacular stencil brush, hold it in place, and just dry brush those knit stitches across the sweater. It's kind of curved, so when I put the stencil on there, I just did half of it and then kind of moved the stencil up so it worked well on that. I am going in with a little bit of plantation pine to add a little bit of shading in between each of those cable stitches, and what a difference that makes. It just really starts to look amazing. I painted the hat pan before, but I didn't like it, so I'm redoing it. This is melon base coat, top coated with watermelon slice. Just get a nice coverage on it. And I decided to put a pretty stencil design on it, and I'm using deep burgundy. This is a beautiful flourish design. Not putting it on super heavy, just enough to break it up so it's not solid. And just put a nice decoration on the hat band. I know the holly berries are going to be in the middle, but I went ahead and filled that in. The letters I'm base coating with melon, and just using my number 5 radical round so that I don't get paint over the edges. This is, when I was doing this, I thought it's pretty much the same as hand painting the lettering. So you use a brush that's comparable to what you would if you were just painting the letters directly on the surface. And top coating with watermelon slice. That little eye's hard to hang on to, so I took a piece of painter's tape and anchored it down. Using my 1/2 inch angle and a little bit of deep burgundy to shade the bottom, probably third of the letters, and then going back with deep plum to even darken that just a little bit more. Wanted to work on that background now that the snowman is finished. Putting another float of black plum around the outer edge. Just wanted to enhance that framing just a little bit. Make sure when you work on this that you pay attention to where those 2 holes are at the top so that you have it hanging straight up and down. Once I get everything into position exactly where I want it, I don't have it glued just yet. Want to make sure everything is just as it needs to be. And I want to add some more snow, and I'm using my palette knife technique. Love how this works. Be careful on those straight lines. If you get too much paint or you don't have it flat enough, you'll get those straight lines. And there's a big blob that I had too much paint on my palette knife, but I kind of like the way it looks, so I left it there. I wanted the hat brim to make sure that it had snow on it. Thought I would put a little bit of snow on the nose. And if you get too much on, it's just super easy to go back and clean it up. I got a little too much on the bottom of the nose, and I can go back with a damp paper towel and just lift off anything that I didn't like. Play around with the palette knife. There's one way that you apply it. For me, I have to kind of push it away if I'm on the edge, and if I pull it towards me, it gets a little bit awkward. I've turned this upside down. I noticed when I did this over the stenciling, kind of gets hung up on that stenciling's raised just a little bit. Love how that turned out. It's just a beautiful effect. And see how that covered up that big blob, so I'm okay on that. But I thought since I had that there, I needed to add a little more to balance it out. Just be very patient when applying the snow with a palette knife, not to go too fast, not to have too much on the palette knife, or it just gets out of hand real quick. And I do reload often. There, I made a mistake again. But if you catch it right away, it's super easy to clean up. A little bit on the berries. Just, if these were painted on, you would have to use a brush to add the snow. It's super easy with the edge of the pieces to put the snow exactly where you want it. If it's painted on, you need a brush to hone in on exactly where it needs to be placed. Put that little eye down there, dot on the eye on that painter's tape so it doesn't scoot around. Just going back and adding a little bit here and there where it needs to be a little more solid. Definitely want these front pieces to stand out from the back. And there, that looks a little bit better. Let the knife create some really unique texture. It's just absolutely fantastic. Now that I have the additional pieces on there, I'm just going back with my palette knife to add more on the background. Now that I put that second base coat of shading of black plum around the outer edge, it just helps this texture to stand out that much more. It's almost making that background even more dimensional. Now I did try when I put the snow on with the palette knife to more or less go up and down so that it looked like falling snow. If you go across or horizontal, it just becomes messy. And this, if you have a little more intention as to how it's placed, it just will work out so much better. I did splatter the entire piece again while everything was in place with Snow White. Tried to avoid the eye area. I varnished all of the individual pieces with ultra matte varnish, and then I glued them in place using quick grip adhesive. I love how this turned out, and I think you will too. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. I would love to hear from you. If you like what you see, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. That helps me out, and you won't miss out on upcoming videos. Be sure to check out my other videos as well. I hope you learned a few new tips, tricks, and techniques to make your painting life a little easier and a lot more fun. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to our next painting adventure together.